I'm Miss Nebraska on all platforms, and I wrote the book The Baby Follows the Belly. I wrote this book in response to the executive order issued by the president on January 1st, 2025, entitled Protecting the Meaning and Value of American Citizenship. And that is exactly what I plan to do today. That's exactly what we're going to do together. So, this executive order, for the very first time, establishes what an illegal immigrant is. It says that an illegal immigrant is someone who was born in the United States, and at the time that someone was born in the United States, their mother was not under the jurisdiction of the United States. Under the jurisdiction of simply means a citizen. So, per this executive order, an illegal immigrant is defined as someone who was born in the United States whose mother is not a citizen to the United States. The United States sitting president goes on to say that the 14th Amendment is to protect the children of those enslaved throughout the history of the United States of America. The United States is built upon precedent law, which means that to interpret any laws, you must start at the beginning. The United States uses precedent law. The laws that come before us, we use those to interpret and define and uphold the laws of today. The sitting president, in response to this executive order, has asked the Supreme Court to interpret the 14th Amendment next summer. I took it upon myself to do it today. So together, we're going to start at the beginning to understand how all Black people can be granted birthright citizenship to America. We must start at the baby follows the belly law in colonial America more than 100 years before the United States was ever formed. Our jurisdiction, our mother's jurisdiction, predates the United States formation. So how I will be defining this throughout our time together is that we had come under the jurisdiction of the baby follows the belly law. First in colonial America, and then the United States would uphold that law as the law of the land, even till this day, because that is the law that they're using to define an illegal immigrant in the executive order on January 1st, 2025. So here we go. Let's get started. In 1662, the Act, Negro Women's Children to Serve According to the Condition of the Mother, states, some doubts have arisen whether children gotten by English men upon Negro women shall be held as slaves or free. Be it therefore enacted and declared by this present Grand Assembly that all children born in this country shall be held bond or free only according to the condition of the mother. And that if any Christian shall commit fornication with a Negro man or woman, he or she shall pay double the fines. So this disgusting law of 1662 that actually take the very first children to be enslaved to this law are actually mixed children. By law, these children would be called mulattoes because this law was created to quell the questions around whether mixed children would be free or not. This law said, here you go, all Negro women's children, no matter who the father is, her children would be enslaved throughout colonial America, more than 100 years before the United States was ever formed. I assume that the United States understands precedent law and how to interpret the 14th Amendment, but the executive order very conveniently leaves out the baby follows the belly law. Without mentioning the baby follows the belly law, you do not have to admit that all Black people can be traced to colonial America more than 100 years before the United States was even formed. But the baby follows the belly law not only reveals that Negro women were enslaved and her mulatto mixed children were enslaved, it also reveals another important discovery. Negro women would not be the only women taken under the jurisdiction of the baby follows the belly law. In 1682, American Indian women of color would come under the jurisdiction of the baby follows the belly law with an act to repeal a formal law making Indians and others free. For the first time, we see the legal definition of those who are to be servants in colonial America. This law states, Act 1, it is enacted that all servants which shall be imported into this land by sea or by land, whether Negroes, Moors, mulattoes, or Indians, So per this law of 1682, it is clear that who is enslaved as servants. Through the law, the baby follows the belly. Negroes, Moors, mulattoes, and Indians. Nearly 60 years later, these very same groups of people would be included in the South Carolina Negro Law. When I say nearly 60 years later, that is to prove and to show the precedence of how this law has been building. So for 60 years, you have seen that those enslaved throughout the history of America have always been ancient Berber people defined as Negroes in the South Carolina law, American Indians of colors, mulattoes, and in the South Carolina Negro law, we see the term Mezito defined for the first time as American Indians mixed with the ancient Berber people. For the very first time, the South Carolina Negro law also in Section 4 defines that the term Negro is confined to slave Africans, and it defines these slave Africans as the ancient Berber peoples and their descendants, lawfully contradicting the West Africa myth that is taught to us in schools. The ancient Berber peoples are the indigenous people of North Africa, and we predate the Egyptians. By law, these same people continue to be mentioned throughout the laws of colonial America until the United States Constitution of 1787. And we know that the Constitution was made in 1787 because it called for enumeration, a count of the people, which is a census, to be created within the next 3 years. That would take us to 1790 with the first United States Census. The United States Constitution of 1787 would include all these people by law to serve as servants under the condition of the mother for life: American Indians, ancient Berber people, mulattoes, and Mezzitos, and Moors, to be counted as 3 for every 5. This law is often misinterpreted to continue the perpetuation of dehumanization and concealing the identities of who all is really enslaved. This law is not intended to say that one human is 3/5 of a human. This law is in response to how they're going to make a count of people on their very first census. For every 5 people that they have deemed their servants, they would only count 3. So that they could continue to perpetuate a narrative of white supremacy on the land. They would leave out 2 of every 5 of the groups of people they had enslaved. The Constitution also called that the African slave trade ended in 1810. So in 1810, the African slave trade ended. In 1810, the United States, even with Great Britain defeated, would take the baby follows the belly law of hereditary perpetuated slavery as their law of the land. With the African slave trade abolished, the United States enslaved population would grow from 1 million to 4 million. With the African slave trade outlawed, 3 million people would be born on American soil into slavery through the law, the baby follows the belly, to continue to perpetuate hereditary slavery, the biggest form of wealth for the United States. In 1857, now that the United States black population included Haitians, Cubans, American Indians, mulattoes, Mezzitos, and the Moors and the ancient Berber peoples, that would not stop the United States Supreme Court from determining that Dred Scott had full-blood African descent. We do not know who Dred Scott's mother is till this day because of the practice of the baby follows the belly law, which made it lawful to rip small children from their mothers to go work for other plantations. Without knowing Dred Scott's identity and genealogy today, there's no way that they knew it in 1857. With this, the Supreme Court will use the false claim of full-blood African descent to exclude Dred Scott and those with African descent that they could not prove from being granted rights to the United States Constitution. In the Dred Scott decision, Chief Taney of the Supreme Court says, and this is a quote verbatim, "To grant those with African descent rights to the Constitution, all of that would be done in the face of the subject race of the same color." In 1857, Chief Taney of the Supreme Court corroborates the same story of colonial America, that 2 groups of people of the same color are enslaved. ancient Berber peoples, and American Indians of color. It would not be until after the Civil War and after the Dred Scott decision that we would all be governed under black codes. The enacting of black codes would lawfully allow states to discriminate against people of color based on the color of their skin and false claims of full African descent that could not be proven. Along with black codes, the Supreme Court would make discrimination against people of color the legal law of the land. The Supreme Court would continue to use African descent that they could not prove as the basis of claims to prevent the 14th Amendment from granting the protection to the very people it is intended to protect. With cases like Slaughterhouse and Plessy v. Ferguson, the Supreme Court would continue to say that discrimination was acceptable because we are the descendants of African slaves that they could not prove. Because of the Supreme Court's discrimination based on unlawful claims of full-blood African descent and the color of our skin, we would not be afforded the full protection of the 14th Amendment until 1954 with Brown versus the Board of Education. In interpreting the 14th Amendment, we must understand how the 14th Amendment was granted to the ancient Berber people enslaved throughout history. And that law has always been to protect those people until it was granted to American Indians in 1924, and it was granted to Juan Kim Ark in 1884. Juan Kim Ark is not an illegal immigrant. His parents had lived in California for 20 years. They legally resided in California. They owned a grocery store, and they paid taxes to the United States. There is nothing more American than paying taxes. So it is very clear through precedent law and through corroborating laws that the 14th Amendment is for the children of the baby follows the belly law. And then that 14th Amendment has only ever been enacted for other people who are born on American soil whose mothers are lawfully here. This means that the United States still to this day is using the baby follows the belly law as the supreme law of the land. So the president has asked the Supreme Court to interpret the 14th Amendment next summer, and I have come to the conclusion that it is up to the people to interpret the laws because the people have the power and the people can hold the Supreme Court accountable. As long as we know the truth, we know that we are the baby belly birthright community of ancient Berber descendants and the ancient people of American Indians as well. Then they have to fall in line. We now have a agreed upon history that is lawful and that is sound. The 14th Amendment that granted our birthright citizenship acknowledges that we are the American soil-born children of the ancient Berber women enslaved through the law the baby follows the belly, and that we are the American soil-born children of the American Indian women, the mulattoes, the mezzitos, and the intermixing of those people with Europeans. As children, we have been enslaved through the law, the baby follows the belly. Without mentioning the baby follows the belly law, the United States can continue to perpetuate our enslavement and hide our identity. Until now. It is my honor, it is my pleasure, and it is my duty to tell you, welcome home.